So here we are. I finally get to meet you in person after all this. You were my first interview after leaving corporate controlled media. And here we are. You're just coming off of having an interview with Joe Rogan. So really been a wild ride, wouldn't you say?
It has been, and I didn't know that was your first. I never would have guessed. It was a great interview, and I enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed every other one that we've ever had. Just a pleasure.
Well, it's an honor, obviously, to have you be my first interview, leaving corporate controlled media and going independent. So what was it like to reach that mark of getting interviewed by Joe Rogan? What was that like?
Um, I don't know. It was a bit of pressure. I must have had 10 different people call me and coach me. And everybody has their own little angle. Oh, say this on Rogan, pump this, mention this website, name this person. Everybody wants the little plug. But I had some great coaching. I have a couple of seasoned media warriors, serious, experienced people. One of them runs a $150 million company that spoke to me and kind of coached me on this. And I also had Peter McCullough call and ask me to kind of ease over some of the statements he made when he was on Rogan about one and done, and that now with Omicron that's not the case. So there was a lot of pressure and excitement, enthusiasm about the opportunity. Rogan is totally chill. He's just there in the moment, relaxed, a fantastic interviewer. And what surprised me, I was asked on another one last night, what surprised you most about Rogan? He is completely up on all the information, and yet it's totally low key. He's very committed to speaking to a general audience. It's core for him. The idea of not playing into all this divisiveness. He is consciously, intentionally a healer right now, and just a very centered, genuinely good person. The business about bringing his daughter's dog onto the set, and then we shot a follow-on clip that pushed the rally that's going to be on January 23rd, and he brought his daughter's dog Snoop, the Chihuahua, on. I mean, it's just the way he is. He's just kind of a sweet guy. Not at all what I expected. I expected more, with the background in Taekwondo and all of that, and surrounding himself. I mean, he's surrounded by ex-SEALs and some serious security capabilities, and that's kind of the world that he comes from. But there was none of that. He was just, I mean, you could sit on the couch and have a chat and kill a beer and wouldn't think anything of it.
So just very down to earth.
Yeah, just a nice guy.
Well, I imagine that you would have a little bit in common in the sense that you both came from very mainstream positions. I mean, you did work with the Department of Defense.
Still doing.
And you came at this very fair and balanced, and Joe Rogan I would have considered mainstream, but now here you have people saying he was taking horse paste, and he even said that he was warned you're crazy. So it seems like you would have that in common, that you came from just being what society would consider normal, to now you're getting attacks and called crazy, both of you.
And actually a lot of others. So there is kind of a fellowship that's being developed among those of us that have had these attacks. It's been amazing to participate in it. And with this group, this International Alliance of Physicians and Medical Scientists that I serve as president for, we tour, go from town to town and give our talks and do our training and that kind of stuff. What's amazing in my experience, I've led many groups. It's kind of part of what I do is assemble and lead teams to solve complicated stuff. All these people are so committed to the cause that it's like there's no ego. They just are putting their shoulder to the wheel and getting the job done. in a very decentralized way. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. And Kristi, it plays into a theme that I've heard again and again. For instance, one of the groups I work with is Hippocrates in Italy. And they're very committed to the model of not having traditional centralized leadership. Likewise, Tess Lori and her group. Tess serves as the main leader, but it's very decentralized. There is kind of a growing movement and awareness that part of the problem here is the structure of how we have been building our organizations and doing business in a deep, profound way, in a just a dissatisfaction with what one sees at the World Health Organization and the CDC and the whole HHS structure in the United States, where you have, carefully controlled information. Only one leader is allowed to speak. Only one leader is allowed to represent the position. I think that is going to turn out to be one of the changes here, is a growing awareness that model is dysfunctional, broken, and it needs to be fixed.
In light of your attacks and seeing how the mainstream media labels people and then tries to get these buzzwords going, has that changed your view on other people that the media has gone after?
Completely.
Because you have people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or people like Alex Jones. Has this kind of made you think, well, maybe they're not as crazy as maybe I was led to believe before?
So I'm going to share. So we did a little bit of a tour on the Hill a few weeks ago, and I met with various senators. And so I walk in to Ron Johnson's office, and I had this mental image from the press of what I was going to encounter with Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson is basically an average Midwestern, straight arrow kind of good guy, open-hearted, very down to earth. No, I've dealt with the Hill for a long time, and I've seen some serious egos. Wasn't there. Just a good guy. I think that, yeah, there's been some hits and all this, and it's never fun to take these arrows from the media. And as you know, they can be a little wicked from time to time. I've been on social media for a long time, and I've kind of gotten desensitized to the trollery. That's been really helpful. Just being able to say, hey, there are haters in the world, and that's just the way it is. And that some of those haters are in media power positions. What else would you expect? I think the most, for me, it has been an awakening journey. There's no question. I didn't seek this. I never expected it. I find myself at the center of this storm of the resistance. And that's what it is, really. And I'm still amazed. But it has profoundly changed my view of the information that we receive on a daily basis, and how much I find myself, me and many others in my world. Mickey Willis is another one, right? Plandemic. Okay, so I went and did a shoot with Mickey for the Plandemic 3 series and had a chance to talk to him. He comes from a liberal Southern California background, Simi Valley, hardcore, progressive California. And then he went through this when he basically got rejected by all of his old colleagues because of Plandemic 1, and decided to just get out of Dodge and move here to Austin. He's another one that's had this journey of experiencing what is really, the fist that's inside that glove, and many, many others. I think that's going to be one of the things that comes out of this. And that's a really hopeful message going into the new year, is that there's a growing cohort of people that are increasingly aware of how thoroughly we've been manipulated.
So you'd say you've been red-pilled?
In like multidimensional red pill. It's I thought I was red pilled. I've been on the inside for so long and seen Tony Fauci's machinations for so long. It's how that's my origin story, was the initial AIDS crisis starting in '83 when I was at Davis. And so I saw the hardball politics, and then that's the next big chapter in my origin story, is experiencing big science at the Salk Institute and ending up with a nervous breakdown and PTSD. Okay, so it's not that I haven't been aware of that, but I had not been aware before of the information control that is globally coordinated. I mean, the Trusted News Initiative is profound. What that means, that has become the Ministry of Truth, full on. I mean, it's, Kristi, another thing, I was talking to another podcaster the other day, a small local one in Tennessee, and a very intellectual woman. And we got talking, and I said, because I was fast-tracked, as a young person, because of testing and things like that. When I was in 4th and 5th grade, I was reading 1984, Brave New World, those kinds of books and the Greek classics. And I got the question of why it was so easy for me to kind of break free of the assumptions and see through the media manipulation. I think that was part of it. It's deep in my soul. It's like, wired into my childhood brain. And but we are seeing full-on Orwellian Ministry of Truth now. There's no holds barred. And what Twitter's doing right now, that I think, with Alex Berenson's bold and brave lawsuit taking on Twitter, and then I've had a bunch of lawyers come to me because of getting deplatformed or canceled, I think is really the right term. I think that we may, certainly people can't deny anymore.
Yeah. There's
so much evidence. And the CNN ratings keep slipping, yay. Maybe we're going to see some change in 2022. That's a hopeful, forward-looking statement.
But in light of this awareness of the propaganda and knowing what they do, it seems like you became an easy target for their buzzword of saying, like, oh, he says he's the mRNA vaccine technology inventor, and they really went heavy on that and have tried to contest that. Do you regret saying mRNA vaccine inventor?
Matter of fact, Jill, my wife, Dr. Jill Glasspool, is she attacks me for not being forceful enough. Okay. And she's been my partner through all of this. She's like, no, don't back down. You did this work. I lived it with you. You were obsessed. You worked insanely hard to do this. I remember those inventions. I remember, she's the one that's written this big statement on the webpage that recounts her version, her vision and experience in the first person of having lived through those events. It was rough on us as a young couple with a son. And so she doesn't back down, and she's insist. For me, I was like, oh, can't we soft pedal this? I'm just getting so much flack. She's like, no, you are not going to do that. So, there's a statement behind every good man is a good woman. And she is definitely actively transplanting a steel rod into my spine on this topic.
What about those that are saying, well, he's just taking this position because he's bitter that he didn't get more credit with the vaccines?
What's funny about all that is these detractors that are basically trying to delegitimize me in any way they can. They're coming at picking at these little things The good news is they haven't been able to find anything of substance in my background. I have no criminal record or any of that kind of stuff. I'm still married to the same woman, after 42 plus years. And I've got, I'm kind of an average guy, kids and all that. And so, and they never are attacking the points made, the science, the issues that I'm raising, except these hired fact checkers. And what I've found is that it doesn't matter whether you cite the literature and you provide them with facts. They are not about the facts. I mean, we now know this from the lawsuit against Facebook, where the Facebook lawyers came flat out and said, well, we call them fact checkers, but these are really opinions. And that's what it is.
It went from a simple true or false, which is what you would think it would be with facts, to now they'll say something false, and the reason is because misleading. and so how do you make that determination? So they're even trying to mark things false that they're trying to put into a gray area, which makes
And I think
no
part of the
sense.
problem is that they now have developed, because this is a new strategy, right? This whole paid fact checker by Facebook, and now Reuters it's important to understand that Thomson Reuters is now integrated into Twitter as Twitter's official fact checker. And you may or may not remember back in the day when I pointed out the first thing that got me kicked off LinkedIn was this post in which I pointed out that the chairman of the board of Thomson Reuters also sits on the board of Pfizer. And I just asked the simple question, does this look like a conflict of interest? That was prompted by a Reuters fact check attack on me that was, inappropriate and incorrect. And I was just kind of a little bit pissed at Thomson Reuters. But that's been part of this learning curve of seeing again and again and again how the game is played. But this business of hiring Logically AI, these small pop-up firms. I mean, Logically AI is run by a guy whose main claim to fame before this was he was an unsuccessful garage band guitarist. I mean, that's it. That's as near as I can find in terms of his background. But he gets these big contracts from Facebook, and it's they're unabashed. They're guns for hire. They will say and attack and do whatever it is that they get paid to do. They're hired guns.
Yeah.
And it's not about truth and facts, and you know that because the people they hire, I mean, they're basically untrained, haven't graduated from college, or if they did, it was in something in humanities or something like this. Or the head of the Trusted News Initiative is actually I think has a bachelor's in humanities, has no background in science. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Yeah. So in terms of this trying to delegitimize me, I knew that this was the price that was going to be paid. I knew going into this that my life would change. When Steve Kirsch and Brett Weinstein and I sat down in Brett's studio in Portland, we all knew that was a turning point and our lives would never be the same. And that is absolutely the case.
But I wanted to ask you about that because that's when I first started finding out about you and watching you was from that Dark Horse podcast. And then it's been interesting to see you evolve like along the way from, I feel like, more soft-spoken to now you're really out there fighting. And what has been the biggest epiphany to you or biggest impression made since then in watching all this pandemic public health policy play out?
There was, when I did the little European tour where the International COVID Summit happened in Rome, and we spoke in the Roman Senate, and I saw the press that was coming out in Italy about that, and got to see these practices of hunting physicians and delegitimizing and weaponizing these terms like anti-vaxxer. In that case, we were rigorous in not speaking about vaccines because the senator that had invited us to speak in the Roman Senate had said, okay, I'm going to do this, but you have to agree not to talk about vaccines because that's verboten. okay? And you can only talk about early therapy. So that's what we did. But the press still attacked us as anti-vaxxers, okay? So that it was clearly a decoupling of reality and what was being presented. And so that was kind of an epiphany. I got labeled as a terrorist and one of the dirty dozen and all that kind of language that we hear here in the States, seeing it play out in the Italian press, and then going from Italy to Portugal. And I was pulled into a group of influencers, you know, politicians, judges, high status healthcare providers, intellectuals in Portugal, and had 2 long evenings with them over dinner and round tables and that kind of stuff with a journalist. And the other one that was just hit me like a brick was this one woman in the Q&A after our roundtable said to me, "We've always believed the FDA and the CDC to be the gold standard for drug development and purity and efficacy, et cetera, for the world. And we now know that it's corrupt." And when she said that, I'd never had that kind of realization. It hadn't entered my mind to be that blunt. And that one was a big epiphany, that the realization that the rest of the world was perceiving the United States HHS system as completely compromised by pharma. And that was a big one. But then there's been a ton of ones, you know, along the road. You talk about me becoming more outspoken. I've seen that with my peers too. So for instance, Peter McCullough is he's kind of chilled out a little bit, but when you're attacked all the time and you have all of this weaponized information against you and no respect. I mean, I'm Mr. Malone, you know, who claims to have invented, I mean, all this language, the kind of classic yellow journalism language, to have it all deployed against me is in absolutely no respect for what I actually did. And they never cite all the patents. I mean, they just gloss over all that. And I knew that it's long been the practice among some to lobby for the Nobel Prize through the press. I was told that I needed to do that. And then I called up a buddy at the Karolinska, and he says, no, we don't care about all that. We have a rigorous evaluation process. Don't even worry about it. But to have that deployed against me by people that came a decade later from what I did, people that I actually coached when they did their first RNA delivery stuff, I brought to a conference in Annapolis that I had set up so that they could interact with the others. And to see the methodical progression of media manipulation by Pfizer and UPenn to try to get Carrico and Weissman the Nobel Prize, that, you know, watching that play out, and this is what had really lit up Jill, was basically them, it's what do they call it in military? You know, false honor or whatever, false valor, right? That somebody tries to take credit for, you know, something that somebody else did in battle. And seeing that actively promoted through the Boston Globe, the New York Times, CNN, and in the European press, and kind of experiencing that in the first person, to kind of have this huge part of my life stripped away from me as if it never existed. I'm told that it didn't exist, that I didn't do the things that I did, that the patents that all have my name on it are irrelevant, and they don't even cite them, and they always miscite the papers. The manipulation of Wikipedia was another one that was a real eye-opener, and tracking that down and seeing how methodical that has become. It's just, I guess it's been a series of epiphanies that have made me realize that there's no upside to just being circumspect and trying to be a nice guy in this environment. This is full on media warfare, information warfare, political warfare, 21st century, like we've never seen before, and coordinated globally. The other thing for me has been the personal journey of coming to terms with what the World Economic Forum really represents. And I really resisted that. You know, people initially were coming to me talking about the Great Reset. I was like, oh, this crazy talk. You know?
That sounds like a conspiracy theory.
It sure sounds like a conspiracy. Yeah, yeah.
Great Reset.
Yeah, but then it's all documented. And then you see it being deployed. And a group of Canadians on a podcast the other day sent me some links from WEF to a site. This is one of the last things I tweeted before. And it had a extremely detailed map of all of the policy positions and the actions that the WEF was taking for a huge range of topics, not the least of which is COVID-19. And it's kind of it's a public document that clearly states everybody that's in our little clique, in our club, these are the things that we will think, these are the things that we will say, this is how we will act. And that one was kind of like the icing on the cake. That was oh, here it is. You know, they're proud of it. They don't hide it. This is the vision. It is a full-on globalist totalitarian vision with the money in control. And the whole, I did a lot of political science when I was an undergraduate in the early 80s, and I had read things like books about transnationalism in the New World Order. I found that fascinating but confusing. How could this possibly happen? And now to see it playing out in real time, and in a way in which national sovereignty, governments are increasingly irrelevant. That's the thing that folks got to wake up about. This is not about the vaccine. The vaccine is a symptom.
It's much bigger. We talked about LinkedIn. We've talked about the hit piece of the Atlantic. Now you're.
Thank you for that, by the way.
And that was easy to tear apart. And now we're seeing, this deplatforming on Twitter after having over 500,000 followers, and Reuters coming after you.
It was 520,000 at the end. That's yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, I wouldn't be so sure that's done and over with. We've seen other people deplatform. Oh, it was a mistake. So we'll see what happens with that. But Reuters is going, and like you said, it's an information warfare. So Reuters is now coming after you with a fact check, particularly on the piece about risk, reward, benefit with children. So you're fighting back with information. So tell me about that and how that's going.
So having had the experience now of being subjected to this, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not proper, and they don't care, right? It doesn't matter what the truth is, it matters what the storyline is that they want to promote. Having had that experience now a few times and dealt with the fact checkers and dealt with this young reporter at Atlantic Monthly, and seeing how that all plays out. For instance, when Peter Navarro and I wrote the op-ed and put it in the Washington Times, which, by the way, was the thing that triggered that Atlantic Monthly piece, in retrospect, it's now clear that that was intended to shut me down because I was starting to speak at that point about policy and criticize the Biden policy. And the criticism, by the way, that I was making, the proposal that I was putting out, was essentially that of the Great Barrington Declaration, which is these three fringe epidemiologists.
Fringe. I mean, they're from Harvard, Stanford, but they're fringe.
Yeah, right. Full professors. So having dealt with this, the question, so I get this new fact checker attack by the Reuters fact checker team. It sounds very official. And they have spoken to the MHRA, and the MHRA has these comments that it listed. So this is the equivalent of the FDA in Great Britain, which, by the way, up until the beginning of the year, was not doing any FDA-type regulatory work. It was all being done by the Central European Union. So they're actually newbies at this, okay? And so they put out this statement to Reuters that they were quoting that was intrinsically full of falsehoods. Like they said, for instance, there have been no pediatric deaths. Well, that took about 2 seconds to prove that false. You can cite if nothing else, you can cite the multiple media pieces coming out of Vietnam with the 4 kids that died from the Pfizer jab. Okay, so that, I reached out to my network and I got a huge volume of information about all the pediatric deaths in VAERS and yellow card. Tess Lori helped. I mean, it was, so the question was there a way to flip the script on the fact checkers? And so I consulted with these media analysts and media warriors that I work with that wish to remain confidential because they run big companies. And we came up with a strategy. Because what happens is you'll write back to these guys and you'll say, well, here's the citation, here's the citation, here's the citation, and they'll ignore it. And they'll go ahead and put out whatever attack, and they'll say, well, Dr. Malone cited some irrelevant documents that aren't properly peer-reviewed, or whatever. They'll trash whatever you put out, right? Because it's not about evaluating truth. It's about enforcing the narrative. So what we did, and I invite anybody to adopt this strategy that's under this kind of pressure, is I sent in a very terse, brief quote to the fact checkers. And I said, basically, thank you so much for the opportunity to respond. And, always trying to be nice because it's going to go public. And you can find the answers that you're looking for, the information that you're seeking at this website, bang, okay, which is linked as the Children's Vaccine tab on our website, rwmalonemd.com. So Jill busted her can on,
You're right.
we had a day and a half to flip this thing because they gave us a short timeline. They'll spring this stuff on you and they're like, oh, well, give us the answer by the end of the day or tomorrow or something, and then we've got this piece written. And I'm like, oh, great, just what I need. And so what we did was I reached out through my network. Hundreds of people and pieces of information came back in. And Jill built a website while I was shuttling over here to do the interview. She just did amazing work, built this detailed website, collated all this information in a tabular form, structured it according to the critiques that Reuters had provided, clipped in, there's a page on Reuters Fact Check that clips in the actual email from them, and clips in the legal challenge that Tess Lori and company have just filed against MHRA because they're off the rails. And so, and clipped in Steve Kirsch's very nice video summarizing the Trusted News Initiative, and just bang, 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 went through all of their various points, hundreds of references, an enormous list of all the footballers and high-performance sports people that are, in their late teens through early 20s that have dropped dead on the field. So, and then all the VAERS reports of pediatric deaths, this is the U.S. database, collated on all there, and then just provided a pointer. And they can cite that or not, but if they're going to say Malone gave us a quote and here it is, it leads them right to the website, and anybody that wants to look at that data can see it. And then, thanks to you and others, now I'm able to go to the world and say, well, this was the attack that came at us from Reuters. This was the fact-checking incidents that they hit us with on short notice. And here's how we responded. You can evaluate the data yourself. And what that does is it puts it in a situation where as my colleague said, this senior guy, he said, oh, they've made the first mistake in media. You don't give life to a bad story, right? And so instead of a clip on Neil Oliver on GB News, now you've got a big international thing where all this media this information has been collated, pulled from scientists from all over the world, and made available to the public. So I think that's whether it's going to work, I don't know, but this is asymmetric warfare. We're basically in a guerrilla warfare situation, and we got to play it smart. Because what I'm seeing is the other side is generally not very smart. They have a big hammer. They've got all kinds of resources, but they don't seem to be very bright.
Well, isn't it interesting that you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with his book with 2,200 citations or somewhere around there, and you have Dr. Fauci just saying, oh, well, he is a disgrace to the Kennedy family. It's like, okay, wait, 2,200 plus citations versus he's a disgrace with no.
Yeah, and then CNN attacked Bobby. It's Bobby is an amazing person. This is not his first battle. But the attempts to delegitimize him have been going on for a long time. And it takes a toll on him too. This latest piece that came out
but like
that was
I
driving
said before,
a wedge between him and his wife.
Evolved in your thinking. Was there ever a time that you were suspect of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his thoughts?
I bought into Bobby is anti-vaxxer.
Right. So you yourself.
It's what we all get put into our brains, right? All the time. It's pushed into our brains. These
so you
stereotypes.
Don't feel that way now?
No, absolutely not. I spent a lot of time with him. He's a true hero. I think he ought to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that what he has done with the Water Keepers Initiative, remember that was his big thing, was water purity all over the world. And then taking on children's health and just insisting that the studies be done, the data being done, digging in and uncovering how profound the lack of information about vaccine safety in children is. Mm-hmm. And once he started taking that position, then of course, particularly mothers with vaccine damaged children flocked to him, just like the vaccine damaged are flocking to Steve Kirsch. I mean, Steve is another example of somebody that didn't ask for this. And he has now been pushed into a defensive crouch, and he is on the attack. But what people don't know is the guy's got a big heart. I mean, he is a classic Silicon Valley engineer with all the trimmings, but he has a big heart, and he has taken in a bunch of vaccine damaged people and given them jobs. Mm-hmm. I think that gets to my point that this is bringing people together in a really good way. And I'm proud to be part of the community. But Bobby, I think he is an American hero. I feel really strongly about that. And he is a powerful intellect. He's a powerful legal intellect. People don't realize the Monsanto lawsuit, he was central to that over Roundup. The man has fought diligently on behalf of the American people his entire life. And to think that he has done that with his life, can you imagine the psychological trauma as a young child of having both your uncle and your father assassinated? Mm. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah, I couldn't have dealt with that. I mean, to come through that and to become a true information warrior like he is, and a defender of humanity, I think it's an amazing journey that he's been on. And then I can tell you that this book took a lot out of him. He was totally focused on this book and sacrificed family time, children, his new wife, everything. He was totally focused on getting this book right. Mm-hmm. There's no reviews. There has been no retort. There's been no statement by Dr. Fauci. There has been no pushback.
Other
once
than
again,
ad hominem.
Yeah, other than the ad hominem attacks. But once again, in terms of the substance of what he's documenting. There's a lot of parallelism with my own case, but it's not about me, but it shows the way the system is set up and these kind of, that's part of the thing about being able to think through how to fight this stuff is they have the standard playbook and they go to it. They just do the same things over and over again. They don't think it through. And so that makes it easy to anticipate what they're going to do. And as I said to Rogan, who's, of course, a martial arts specialist, that I said, Joe, you understand using the energy of the enemy against them. And that's kind of the way we have to think. We have to be smart about this.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like it all comes back to the children. Do you think that, and wanting to protect children, do you think that that is what broke the camel's back, or whatever that saying is, as far as getting you off Twitter, is your pointing out like the risk-reward benefit with the children?
So fortunately, I had some Twitter tabs open when it happened, and I haven't refreshed those. So I still have a record of the last tweets I sent out. One was a video by David Martin talking about exposing the faces of the people that are behind all this. Mm-hmm. So he's become pretty radicalized and outspoken. And then the last one was a Substack that Jill and I put out, Dr. Jill Glasswell-Malone, my wife and partner. And it was centered around this really powerful video that the Canadian COVID Care Alliance group put out, extremely well produced, that just rigorously documents bang, 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 all the malfeasance and data manipulation that went into the Pfizer studies. And it's stuff that we all knew. And, I tweeted this out, or I tweeted that out, or whatever, and the other guys did too. And we've all talked about this, that, and but seeing it assembled in a clear, coherent way, in a single video, and explaining the nuances of the data manipulation and how it was done in ways that everybody can understand, that was the final straw. And when I carefully watched that video, everything in there was factual.
So you think that is, you hit the mark, so you had to go.
So was it that? Was it that Reuters, Thomson Reuters, which is now the fact checker for Twitter, has this fact check initiative coming at me, and they decided to do this? Was it the video that has gone viral, the little 4-minute clip that's on globalcovidsummit.org, where I talk about, basically say, parents, you better think twice, because if your child is vaccine damaged, it can't be fixed, right? And so you better be sure, because you're going to have to live with it the rest of your lives. That thing was another one that I literally sat on a beach in Puerto Rico, and me and this other senior media guy composed it. And then we recorded it in Puerto Rico, and then we did a kind of a roundtable open session with about 50 physicians and parents and stuff in Puerto Rico. And that thing it is kryptonite. That provoked a direct attack on Facebook by the Israeli Ministry of Health, attacks from the major radio station in Spain that happens to be owned by BlackRock, attacks in the media in Italy. I mean, that they wouldn't be acting like that if that video wasn't striking a nerve. So when all that happened, my media colleague was like, "Oh, this means we're winning." Yeah. The Israeli one was fascinating because the Israeli Ministry of Health comes out and does this usual slander, all the same talking points on Facebook. And I have enough fans in Israel, apparently, who knew, that apparently in Hebrew, right? It's all in Hebrew, can't read it. That the responses to the Facebook page were slamming the Ministry of Health for what they had done. Then a journalist picked this up. He put out a piece talking about me. He interviewed me and did an hour-long podcast with me, like this format, Okay, then he got one of my main detractors that had been writing this to correspond with me directly and guarantee that they would put out what I wrote back. And so what I got from him, because he's a big fan of Carrico and Weissman, that's really the subtext here, okay? And he's like been on stage with them and given them this big award that they get like $1 million from the Israeli government. And so he was defending this, and he made a series of statements that were just objectively false. It was trivial for me to go through and say, no, here's the facts, here's the facts, here's the patents, whatever. And all that got printed. So it's this. That's why I'm saying this kind of, you can use their energy against them, but you got to be smart about it. And I think, you know, the hill that I've chosen to die on is stopping mandated jabs in kids.
Well, I wanted to ask about that and push back a little bit, because I've gotten pushback. One of the biggest concerns, and it's documented that there's this concern over myocarditis or heart health problems. When you raise that about the jab, the pushback that you get is, well, it's 37 times higher chance that kids will get myocarditis from COVID than the jab. Is there any
I haven't seen that data.
Is there any truth to that?
No,
I know. I'm like, where is this coming
from?
from?
So when they say that kind of stuff, you got to go back and say, okay, show me the paper. And there is literature out there that is very biased in both directions. Okay, but this is the beauty of what Jill did on the website. Is there is over 100 references there about myocarditis in kids. The incidence rate of myocarditis in children from SARS-CoV-2 is tiny. The incidence rate in young men, boys, as documented in the Hong Kong comprehensive study, huge study looking at hospitalized myocarditis in children after receiving the vaccine, I think it's all Pfizer, is 1 in 2,700. That's a big number. And that's hospitalized myocarditis. So then what they say is, well, okay, that's mild. That's, you know, minor. You talk to cardiologists and they're like, what? You know, the mortality rate of myocarditis in general before all this happened, the 5-year mortality rate is like 27%. What do you think these footballers are dying of? These high-performing athletes.
That's the other thing is like, well, how do you know it's not COVID? And
well, that's why you have to track it down. But so the thing is that they use the argument that they will attack us for using. They'll say, well, you haven't proven that these are associated. But then they'll turn right around and make a blanket assumption that they're not vaccine associated, that they're associated with the virus itself. So it's kind of like they want to have it both ways, which is why my position, I have to stay centered on the data.
Yeah.
And say, here's the manuscripts, here's the data, here's the VAERS reports, here's the yellow card reports, again and again and again. And with those reports, the way we put it out, you can read what the history was as reported on VAERS. You just have to click on it and you can see for yourself.
Well, that's obviously become demonized as well. Every time you bring up VAERS, they say, oh, well, that's not vetted.
They'll demonize it when it's to their advantage, and then they'll exploit it when that's also to their advantage. So it's again, they're wanting to have it both ways. The thing about that whole thread is this is my core argument with all this. We wouldn't be having our society torn apart if the FDA and the CDC had done their job. The real problem here is that we don't have decent data. If we had decent data, if they had done their job and insisted that Pfizer do the multi-year study that it had initiated rather than killing it after a few months and jabbing all the controls, I mean, that was an intentional strategy. There's a lot of ways you can manipulate clinical trials.
And that's the thing, too, that I've been wondering about. I am definitely no statistician. I'm terrible with numbers. That's why I speak and write for a living. But one thing that has had me thinking is, like, just how easy is it to manipulate data and to manipulate numbers? I mean, even as far as the myocarditis thing had me thinking, okay, well, even if we were to agree that there would be a greater chance with problems of myocarditis in children if they got COVID, are they factoring in, well, if they got COVID part? Like, first you have to
Have
factor
they
in,
proven that they actually had the disease? Yeah, I
right,
mean, there's
and is, I mean, are they factoring in how difficult it is for children to get COVID or COVID in a bad way to begin with?
serious COVID.
Right,
So that's
exactly.
why I always couch that in healthy, normal children shouldn't have mandated vaccines. I believe nobody should have vaccine mandates for these experimental products. I believe it is absolutely contrary to the Nuremberg Code, the Helsinki Agreement, the Common Rule, the Belmont Report, etc. Okay, it is lawless behavior that's going on, full stop. And actually, we've got a section on that webpage that I talked about that is legal analysis of why it's lawless, why it's illegal what they're doing. And that's going to go to the Supremes, and we'll see what they have to say. But this it is easy to manipulate the data. So I'm going to give you a specific example that relates to kids, since we're talking about kids. So in the original Pfizer trial, there was about a little north of 2,000 children enrolled in two groups, placebo and experimental. So about 1,000 each. Mm-hmm. So in that, they claimed that there were no serious adverse events in the children. In that, there was one child, Maddie Gary, 12-year-old girl, and she is listed in the official database that was provided to the FDA by Pfizer as having gastrointestinal distress. Okay? What about who? So then this comes out, and her mother starts speaking up. No, that's not true. She had a seizure, then she became paralyzed. She's now wheelchair bound and having to be fed through an NG tube, a nasogastric tube. Okay, that is not gastric distress.
No.
It's not a stomach ache. Okay, there are all kinds of ways that, remember, this is what I do for a living, clinical trials and regulatory affairs. There's all kinds of ways that you can tweak databases at different stages when you do the database cleaning and scrub and resolution and write the clinical trial final study report. And you can craft that study report in all kinds of ways. You can highlight the things that look good and downplay or stick into obscure appendices the stuff that look bad. And in fact, all of that is done by Pfizer. That's the thing that the Canadian little video really, really well documents. And then we have this new disclosure from the whistleblower here in Texas about the clinical contract research organization that was running those studies for Pfizer and all the malfeasance and manipulation that was done there. Okay, so this is all coming out. The wheels are coming off the bus here. It's a question of, and normally, so if I was doing that, it was a study that I was principal investigator on, or a clinical contract research organization that I was working for, and that stuff came out, I would expect to get a 483 warning letter and probably lose my ability as a principal investigator to run a clinical trial in the future. That's what I would expect to have happen. That's why I resigned from Allchem when it became clear that the Northwell study that was funded with this contract that I wrote early on for famotidine, that's why I resigned, is because I could tell that they didn't know what they were doing and they were going to get into trouble. And lo and behold, they did. And what happened? That's a great case study. What happened in that case? Well, the FDA came in and audited them and demonstrated clearly that they didn't know what they were doing. They weren't following good clinical practice, and they were mismanaging the study. And the study was put on hold, and BARDA didn't continue to fund it, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way things are normally supposed to happen. And in the case of Pfizer, they can do no harm. And the way that it used to be about a decade ago, that there was this neat little trick that pharma was playing. Pharma used to run all their own clinical trials in-house. And then for financial reasons, and I think also liability, they outsourced it. So that's why all these clinical contract research organizations popped up all over the country and all over the world, is because the pharma basically said, okay, we're no longer going to have this in-house. We're going to provide oversight, and you guys are going to do it. Okay? And what that allowed them to do was, when data got manipulated, when bad stuff happened in a clinical trial, it wasn't being done properly, the pharma could say, oh, It's not our problem. We didn't do that. Wash our hands. It's those bad guys over there. Okay. And maybe that company would get dissolved and all the people go to work for another one. I mean, there's enough of these around, right? So that was the ecosystem. And the FDA shut it down and they said, no, we're changing the rules. The sponsor, ergo pharma, that's regulatory language, has the liability for whatever happens with its subcontractors. Okay? So what that means is that all of this stuff is coming back on Pfizer. And the FDA and the CDC are playing the classic, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil game. That's not going to be sustainable. And it's starting to crack, and the information's coming out. It's working through the legal system, but it takes time.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say starting to crack. I've noticed that just over the past week, maybe two, it seems like the administration and the CDC, some of them are walking things back. So you have Biden saying, no, it's up to the states.
Even though that was classic.
Even though I'm still gonna pursue federal mandates, but it's up to the states. Then you have,
we can't solve this problem. The states have to.
Right.
Oh, by the way, we're going to restrict your availability of monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like to speak. But I mean, just the fact that he walked that back a little bit or said that, and then you had the CDC, a spokesperson saying, okay, no, cloth masks don't work. And then you also had, there's so much that I had to write.
Shortening the quarantine time, that's another one.
That's what I felt like there was so many that I was like trying to write them down. Oh, and then Rochelle Walensky saying, admitting PCR tests might continue
the PCR story is a huge scandal. What that shows, you were talking about the data integrity. What that means is that the incidence rate of COVID disease and death, because what they said was anybody that dies in the hospital, anybody that dies that can be shown to be SARS-CoV-2 positive by a false PCR test, right? That was the
counts as a death.
Counts as a death from COVID. What that means is the bottom number in the ratio for anything, the incidence of death, all this huge scare that is the basis for all the fear porn. You're all going to die, right? That's justified the emergency use authorizations and everything else. This statement that's about to expire in mid-January that is underlying all this emergency declaration. That's all built, it's a house of cards. And the CDC is now starting to come clean about that. They're not talking about the implications. They're just saying, oh, well, the PCR assay was bunk and we shouldn't have used it. Well, thank you. But, now, why don't you fix all the other stuff that is the consequence of your bad judgment?
But that's what I mean. All of this is coming out and being like in some ways walked back, and it just makes you wonder, what are they up to? Is it because the story's cracking, or is it because they're going to push something else on us? It just makes you wonder.
Well, that's like Zev Zelenko is scared silly about smallpox. Remember, he was the guy that originally wrote the letter to Trump advocating for hydroxychloroquine. He was one of the early adopters of early treatment. So, yeah, it's hard. I can't. So, Joe is pressing me on the what are they thinking kind of questions. And it's like, Joe, I can't get in their heads. I'm not going to do that. All I can say is this is what I'm observing. These are the facts. This is their behavior. This is what they're saying. I can't infer what their motives are. And I think that's the case here. And I was on Newsmax last night, as you know, and they played a bunch of clips of Tony Fauci coming out with the scare and fear porn about children and Omicron, and then recently walking that back because the data aren't there. I knew the data weren't there when he said it.
Well, and then he said we should probably have it be required, or vaccine mandates for just between interstate travel, and then he walked that back too. So that's why it's been interesting.
When he came out with that, I was like, I wonder what the airline industry, I'll bet the airline industry right now is going, ring, ring. Hey, Joe, get a clue. This is going to destroy us. So yeah, it's. I don't know what's going to happen in 2022, but there's some encouraging signs, and as you know, I try really hard to look for the silver lining in things,
Mm-hmm.
and if this whole trauma that we've been through nationally and globally leads to an awareness of how interconnected we are, and the need for healing and the need for community and the importance of integrity and the importance of human dignity. If this can lead to an awareness, that's people. That's kind of the um, perhaps naive, Pollyannish, hopeful position in a response to the Great Reset. Is people use the term the Great Awakening. Are we going to see people? You know, one of the things for me and I've experienced this before again and again because I've been in these outbreaks before, is you get at the front edge and you're in an information bubble and you don't realize that you're perceiving things that the average person, because they're not in that moment, in that stream of data that you're just writing, you know, like a bronc, okay? They're not in that. And they don't, so then you can say things to them and they'll act like you're from Mars. You know, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And then 6 months later, or 60 days later, or sometimes even 30 days later, then they're suddenly like, oh yeah, I get it. Like the lab leak hypothesis is a great example of that. And so I have to kind of not allow myself to be too cynical about people because they're just people. They're just living their lives and taking care of their kids and trying to keep their job and not get fired because they did or didn't take the jab or haven't taken the third jab or the fourth jab or whatever the thing is, right? They're just living their lives. They're not all wrapped up in all of this. And so I think hopefully that persuadable middle is starting to see more and more the journey that I've had and many of my colleagues have had and you've had in terms of understanding what corporate media is really all about and how it is centrally controlled and how it is built as another tool for these multinational corporate interests. I mean, they've intentionally gone out and strategically acquired media assets so they can push their their messages. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's the tell is the investments don't make sense from a strict business ROI, return on investment standpoint. You know, it doesn't really make sense that Amazon bought Washington Post. Well, they bought Washington Post for an agenda other than just making profit off the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. These historic flagships. Or the Atlantic Monthly. I mean, I used to read Atlantic under the time of James Fallows, a brilliant guy, full of insights. You know, whatever you thought of it, it was intellectually interesting and rigorous and well thought and well written. And it went under and it got sold. It got sold to Bill Gates and Steve Jobs' widow. And why did they buy it? Because it had that brand, that flagship, and all that comes with having a monthly. Because when things are put out on a monthly as opposed to a daily, you know, the daily stuff falls off. Mm-hmm. All the monthly articles stay. Mm-hmm. They stay in digital memory mm-hmm. in a big way. And, you know, so why make these investments in these failing legacy media tools? Because it's useful strategically to advance your corporate interests. Right. And to push whatever messaging you want to push. And in a world in which all of these firms are all basically owned by 4 or 5 major investment groups that have assets, you know, BlackRock's assets are greater than the largest bank in the People's Republic of China. You know, think that through, okay? These groups have become so big that they can control whether national economies. And, you know, if you can control a nation's economy, you control that nation. You don't have to fire up a bullet.
Yeah.
You need no tanks. You got them.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about the pending EUA expiration and also how that may or may not relate to the March coming up at the end of the month.
Thank you for that segue. So I'm going to, for your audience, for your viewers, please go to www.defeatthemandatesdc.com. Okay. So on January 23rd in Washington, D.C. Now, I live an hour and a half south of D.C., and January 3rd is not my preferred date to go hang out in the
in the freezing cold.
It's going to be a march between Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial. So, the quad on January 23rd, not my idea of a good time. Bring your coats. A huge amount of capital is being put into this rally. Well north of $600,000. Full security, professional organizing team. This is being done right.
I got to imagine, though, that's going to make some people a little bit worried or hesitant to come, seeing as other things that have happened
right.
at the Capitol.
And so that's why the
hearing.
security has been so important. That's where a lot of this capital is going, is making sure that we have, top-notch private security to control that environment so that we're not having incursions from hostiles that would be provocateurs.
Or false flag.
Yeah, precisely. Okay. And the thing is, why January 23rd? There's the Worldwide Rally for Freedom is January 23rd. So here in the States, we generally have not had big protests like have been going on all over the rest of the world.
Right.
Okay. So this is being done in a way that coordinates America with what's going on in Europe and Australia, etc. So that's why that date. They're hiring buses. We've got rappers. High Res is going to come in. Multiple speakers. And the point is, I'm going to just read something. This is the emphasis. This is a rally for every party, ideology, race, and background uniting together to defeat the mandates. This is about the mandates. And it's not about left or right. Vaccinated and unvaccinated, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, all racial groups. This is a unity rally for America to say no to these illegal government-imposed mandates. You don't have to be anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine or jabbed or unjabbed or any of this other stuff. Let's come together and agree that it's just not okay for the government to be telling us what we have to put into our bodies, and more importantly, what we have to put into our children's bodies. It's not okay for the government to be inserting itself into the family. That has got to stop. So that's what the rally's about, and thank you for teeing that up. Now there was another aspect to that. I got off on that riff.
Because it's coming up that the EUA is.
Oh yeah, so then the question, when you're sitting like you and I, where we're constantly sensitive to what's going on in media, and you see this sudden surge of reports in the media, a lot from New York media, talking about Omicron and Omicron's danger in children. I mean, just again and again and again and again, it's coming out, okay? And it's all grossly disproportionate. It's not connected to anything real. There's no papers out there. It's totally inconsistent with the research. They'll take some anecdotal report from some clerk in a hospital or something like that and make it into a huge thing, and talk about anecdotal data. When you see that kind of coordinated behavior, folks like you and me say to ourselves, oh, what's going on here? Okay, why are they suddenly pushing the fear porn about Omicron when Omicron is very benign? There's hardly any deaths worldwide from Omicron. Okay, why is that? And so then you got to start thinking, there must be an ulterior motive. And conveniently, maybe this is just circumstance. Maybe that has nothing to do with that. But the 2-year declaration of emergency expires on January 15th. And if that is allowed to expire and it's not renewed, then the legal basis for all the emergency use authorization language falls away. And so I think that the government is in a position, I mean, there's these weird paradoxical incentives. I think the government right now is incentivized to push fear about this virus because they have to have sufficient fear in order to justify reinitiating the emergency declaration. And that comes up in mid-January. Now, let's see if that happens. That's a forward-looking statement. I don't know if that's what they're thinking. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. But I asked some legal experts to dig into this, and I've sent you the link to document whether or not that's what's going on. And it appears that's the case, is that there is an expiration of the declaration that provides the legal underpinning, the declaration of emergency, that provides the legal underpinning for all of this other stuff where they have basically disregarded the law. So let's see what happens. But that is, that's like these perverse incentives that hospitals have to kill people. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. That's not a nice way to say it. It's not very pretty. But hospitals get paid to have people die of COVID. And it's not a small figure. It's a lot of money. There is a perverse incentive for hospitals to not want early treatment. Okay? Because then people don't go to the hospital and they don't get their big plus up from the federal government. I mean, there's a bunch of, we call, you've been around long enough, you know the term blowback. Something is used in the intelligence service all the time. These unintended consequences of bureaucratic decisions because, often it's not the sharpest tools in the shed that are making these calls and making these decisions on the fly. And there's a huge stack of bad policy decisions that have driven what is now one of the worst mortality rates in the world in the United States. I mean, we all think, oh, we got the best medical system and Tony Fauci is a hero. No, I'm sorry, look at the data.
Yeah. It's literally one of the worst. Well, it's about that time. Is there any final word, final thought?
Kristi, it's been a lot of fun and a pleasure to share this journey with you. And I'm so grateful for the chance to just sit and talk a little bit here in the studio and not over Skype and Zoom and blah, blah, blah.
And all the technical difficulties that come with that.
It goes on and on. So Happy New Year's to everybody. Let's hope it's a better 22 for all of us. And be kind to each other. We don't have to play in to, the media really likes to set us against each other. It sells clicks, sells soap, whatever the hell it sells Pfizer jabs, right? On CNN, or cars, or whatever the thing is, okay? Don't buy into it. We're one people, we're one nation. We have common purpose. We have this amazing gift of a constitution. So let's see if we can't not allow the media to hurt us like a bunch of sheep. Think for ourselves and rebuild community, integrity, and human dignity.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Malone. It's been quite the journey, right? And it's not over.
It's not over. Okay, we're good?
The Oscar winners give a press conference, and how to buy a sailboat.
I guess my feeling at this point in time is maybe we need to be completely a little bit more scary for the public.
Especially with the Delta variant, which is the hardiest and most contagious variant we've seen to date. We need all the protection that we can get. That's why the vaccines are so effective.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
We've got to get them vaccinated, and hopefully they will do it willingly.
I think we really need to make it clear that there are privileges associated with being an American.
We have to be more blunt. We have to be more forceful.
If you do not want to get vaccinated, You can work from home. You can homeschool your children. You can shop online. So where is this coming from? People saying, I'm now being forced to be vaccinated.
If you want to travel, you better go get that vaccine.
You should be wearing masks even when you are vaccinated if you are indoors.
If you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated.
We have to say something coming out, you don't get vaccinated, you're going to die. I mean, let's just be really blunt to these people.
Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated.
You've always thought you couldn't bear press on nails because of all the active things you do? Recolored in 7 luscious hues. Just...
Our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. These signals being sent through...
There is a war on for your mind. Our signal has reached more than 2 billion people. But the enemy is now aware of the fact that we've broken through and are moving to block us on every front. The only way you're going to be able to see our videos and articles is to visit Infowars.com itself and hand share the videos and articles to everyone you know. The signal is getting through and is exposing and defeating the globalist when we're able to get it through. But they're admittedly expanding their operations to suppress us, so only you can boost the signal. Only you can defeat the globalist. We're in this together. I salute you for your work, and I ask all of you to redouble your efforts.
If you are receiving this transmission, you offer resistance.
Should you wear a mask if you're healthy?
No.
And if you're not sick, you shouldn't be wearing a medical mask. But if you are, then you should.
Right now is our insistence now on wearing masks.
Masks do not work for the general public.
People should not be walking around with masks. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
You do not need to wear a medical mask. Masks don't control viruses, they control you. That's what this is about. I really believe that if we get rid of the masks, the rest of this house of cards fall down.
It just blew my mind how the entire world just rolled over and put on a mask.
The biggest issue with face masks is the impact they have on our children.
But children in masks is absolutely dangerous.
And this has to stop. Defend our children.
The air should not be illegal to breathe.
COVID Land, Episode 2, The Mask. Order your copy now at InfoWarsStore.com and receive Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove and The Order of Death absolutely free from InfoWarsStore.com.
I've done quite a bit of studying when it comes to history. And there are so many times and places where generations of people fight for freedom. And they don't even get to see results while they're alive. In fact, sometimes it takes 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 generations for those freedoms to be realized. I have been extremely blessed in my life because I have gotten to see in my 28 years of the fight incredible change and huge awakening. But I've also lived to see the globalists launch their depopulation operation, Operation Lockstep. I have lived to see the New World Order accelerate its depopulation program. And I know that if we don't turn them back now and seriously expose them as the premeditated frauds they are, they're going to continue this breakdown, this collapse of society using COVID-19 and other viruses they're going to release, and the hysteria and fear that the corporate media that they own is going to engage in 21st century levels of gaslighting. And so now more than ever, I want to salute, I want to humbly thank, and I want to just let you know how amazing you are. The globalists hate InfoWars because InfoWars has got their number and is the most accurate outlet out there. Not just myself, but the guests, the callers, the crew, this family. And now more than ever, people are really understanding the truth and they're waking up. So for myself and the whole InfoWars crew, thank you so much for keeping us in the fight. And now I want to encourage you again to continue to invest in your future and humanity's future and our children's future by sharing the articles and the videos and the links at Infowars.com/show and freeworldnews.tv and band.video, because you are the modern Paul Revere's. You are the answer to the globalist tyranny. You are the resistance. So God bless, and thank you so much again.